Number 14. Tombs are obviously more liable to invasion, with and without assistance from the undertaker and his subalterns than graves. There may be a few exceptions where the sexton does not cooperate. If a grave be dug in a suitable soil of a proper depth, which is some feet lower than the usual measure, the body will, in all probability, remain undisturbed for ages, and until corruption and the worm shall have done their work upon flesh and blood, and decomposition is complete, an intelligent sexton who keeps an accurate chart of his diggings will eschew that spot. On the other hand, every coffin is exposed to view when a tomb is opened for a newcomer. On such occasions, we have sometimes full employment in driving away idlers who gather to the spot to gratify a sickly curiosity or to steal whatever may be available, however sacred to the memory, and so on. The tomb is left open for many hours, and not unfrequently overnight. The mouth, perhaps slightly closed, but not secured against intruders. During such intervals, the dead are far less protected from insult and the espionage of idle curiosity than the contents of an ordinary toy shop, by day or night. 50 years ago, curiosity led me to walk down into a vault, thus left exposed. No person was near. I lifted the lid of a coffin. The bones had nearly all crumbled to pieces. The skull remained entire. I took it out, and covering it with my handkerchief, carried it home. I have at this moment a clear recollection of the horror produced in the mind of our old family nurse by the exhibition of the skull and my account of the manner in which I obtained it. What an awful thing it would be, the dear good soul exclaimed, if the resurrection should come this very night, and the poor man should find his skull gone. My mother was informed, and I was ordered to take it back immediately. It was then dark, and when I arrived at the tomb, in company with our old negro, Hannibal, to which the office was in no wise agreeable, the vault was closed. I deposited the skull on the tomb, and walked home in double quick time, with my head over my shoulder the whole way. I relate this occurrence to show how motiveless such trespasses may be. Just like that cultural element that they had at that point. There is a morbid desire, especially in women, which is rather difficult of analysis, to descend into the damp and dreary tomb, to lift the coffin lid, and look upon the changeling, softening, corrupting features of a parent or child, to gaze upon the mouldering bones, and thus to gather materials for fearful thoughts and painful conversations, and frightful dreams. A lady lost her child. It died of a disease, not perfectly intelligible to the doctor, who desired a post-mortem examination, which the mother declined. He urged. She peremptorily refused. The child was buried in the granary ground. A few months after, another member of the same family was buried in the same vault. The mother, notwithstanding the remonstrances of her husband, descended to look upon the remains of her only daughter, and, after a careful search, returned in the condition of Rachel, who would not be comforted because it was not. In a twofold sense, it was not. The coffin and its contents had been removed. The inference was irresistible. The distress was very great, and fresh upon the slightest allusion to the end of life. Cases of premature sepulture are, doubtless, and extremely rare. That such, however, have sometimes occurred, no doubt has been left upon the mind upon the opening of tombs. These are a few only of many matters which are destined from time to time to be brought to light upon the opening of tombs. Some people have been shown to have died in the embalming process or the cremation process in modern times too, and which are not likely to disturb the feelings of those whose deceased relatives and friends are committed to well-made graves. On all these occasions, ignorance is bliss. Tombs, not only such as are constructed under churches, but in common cemeteries, are frequently highly offensive. On the score of emanation, they are liable to be opened for the admission of the dead at all times, and of course, when the worms are riotous and corruption is rankest, and the pungent gases are eminently dangerous and disgusting. Even when closed, the intelligible odor arising from the dissolving processes which are going on within is more than living flesh and blood can well endure. Again and again, visitors at Mount Auburn have been annoyed by the effluvium from the tombs. By the universal adoption of well-made graves, this also may be entirely avoided. When a family becomes, or is supposed to be, extinct, or has quitted the country, their dead kindred are usually permitted to lie in peace in their graves. It is not always thus if they have had the misfortune to be buried in tombs. To cast forth a dead tenant from a solitary grave, that room might be found for a newcomer would scarcely be thought of, but the temptation to seize 5 or 6 tombs at once for a town's account, on the pretext that they were the tombs of extinct families, has once at least proved irresistible and led to an outrage so gross and revolting. In this commonwealth, that the whole history of cemeteries in our country cannot produce a parallel. In April of 1835, the Board of Health in a town of this commonwealth gave notice in a single paper that certain tombs were dilapidated, that no representative of former owners could be found, and that if not claimed and repaired within 60 days, those tombs would be sold to pay expenses and so on. In fulfillment of this notice, in September following, the entire contents of 5 tombs were broken to pieces and shoveled out. In one of these tombs there were 30 coffins, the greater part of which were so sound as to be split with an axe. A portion of the silver plate, stolen by the operatives employed by the Board of Health, was afterwards recovered, bearing date as recently as 1819. The Board of Health then advertised these tombs for sale in 2 newspapers. Nothing of these brutal proceedings was known to the relatives until the deed of barbarity was done. Now can scarcely be credited that in that very town, a few miles from it, and in this city, there were then living numerous descendants and relatives of those whose tombs had thus been violated. Some of the dead, thus insulted, had been the greatest benefactors of that town, so much so that a narrative of their donations has been published in pamphlet form. Among the direct descendants were some of the oldest and most distinguished families of the city, whose feelings were severely tried by this outrage. The ashes of the dead are common property. The whole community bestirs itself in their defense. The public indignation brought those stupid and ignorant officials to confession and atonement, if not to repentance. They passed votes of regret, replaced the ashes in proper receptacles within the tombs, and put them in order at the public charge. A meager and miserable atonement for the injury of this peculiar nature, and though graciously accorded, extorted by the stringency of public sentiment and the fear of legal process, yet, on the whole, the only satisfaction for a wrong of this revolting and peculiar character, the insecurity of tombs, is sufficiently apparent. An empty tomb may be attached by creditors, but by statute of Massachusetts, 1822, Chapter 93, Section 8, it cannot be while in use as a cemetery. By no law of man or nature can prevent the disgusting effects and mortifying causalities and misconstruations of power which have arisen and will forever continue to arise from the miserable practice of burying the dead in tombs.